रिजॉर्ट्स बनने लगे, उनकी छत वगैरह उनकी दीवारें बनाने में भी इसका बहुत यूज में आता है। तो इट्स अ वेरी इकोनॉमिकली इंपॉर्टेंट एज वेल एज इकोलॉजिकली इंपॉर्टेंट grass species. Then we have these kind of open plains with the sand dunes in Rajasthan. You see in this photo, this is basically fog shrub, Caligonum polygonoides, which is a very important shrub, and it is actually declining very fast. It is a very key important sand binder, which is native to the landscape. The flower of this species is also used for local cuisines. So you can see the value of the species for the, again, for the ecology and as well as for the communities living around this landscape. Then you'll see some grasslands like this. These are Cenchrus and Dicanthum. So Cenchrus and Dicanthum, these are two species which are really high value of palatability they have. So these are really good pastures to support large number of livestock, which we know that Rajasthan support the highest density of livestock. So, and after that, most of area we have looks more tree-less, barren-looking area, supporting the highest density. I just keep this thing in mind. We'll discuss it in next few slides. Then you'll also see in the driest part of Rajasthan, the far western in Jaisalmer and Barmer areas, you'll see these kind of tall grasses and bushes. This is a Lacyrus syndicus type grasslands. Locally, it's known Sevan. This is again a very highly nutritious grass species, and not just nutritious, but most of these species are very resilient. They can sustain the this extreme climatic cycles of our region, which we see throughout the year. We have winter is also very cold, while summer is super hot. So between these pulses of weathers, all these grassland species survive. So there are some common things between all those habitats which I showed you. Is that first, they are not known for their tree canopies, though there are a lot of native trees found in this habitat. But there is much more diversity in their grassy layer, and that's why we call it a grassland basically. And another common thing is all of these habitats which you've seen is actually categorized as wasteland. So this is an open natural ecosystem map of India. You can see, and the red map in the inset, which tells the uh, wasteland atlas, wasteland area of India. You see, more than 69% of all habitats which you saw in previous slide is actually classified as a wasteland, and that is very big gap. Because of that gap, we actually these habitats are facing a lot of degradation. And in many times, degradation comes in the form we do not recognize it as a degradation, which is actually simply having high density tree plantation in these habitat, which is actually a degradation factor. But before we jump to that, you must have a question that why these habitats are like that. Like why there are no forest in the why there are no rainforest in Western Rajasthan? Why it is grasslands or desert? Right. So the very it's a very simple answer basically that we this is a Whitaker's biome which we all have read at some point of our life, which tells that how the gradients of temperature and rainfall actually determine the what kind of ecosystem will be there in a particular areas. Right. So you see drylands or especially grasslands and open natural ecosystem can be found in the extreme hot and cold condition, but in the drier condition. Dry in terms of rainfall, it is dry, but in terms of season, extreme hot and extreme cold, both climate can support open natural ecosystems. So now, if we translate into Rajasthan, how do you see Rajasthan basically? So this map is showing you the rainfall gradients of Rajasthan. You can see from the west to east. In the west, there's a as less rainfall as less than 200 mm. In many cases, it actually can go below 100 mm as well in that part. And as you move towards east, rainfall increases by 100 mm per annum. So you see, in the center of you see in the center there's Aravalli, and after the Aravalli, the rainfall pattern suddenly changes. Right. So now we can, based on this map, we can see the western part is a dry and the eastern part is wet. But if you see the eastern part is also the highest rainfall is around 800 and 900 mm only. If we compare it with the other infra, it is still the less. That's why many of these areas are semi-arid landscape. Now the temperature again see in the there's extreme hot temperature, while in the winter again there's a really low temperature goes. So the state sees the seasonal pulse of climate. So you see across Rajasthan, and now this is the map of our open natural ecosystem. So you see in the western part, where you see the driest part is covered by large patches of Ovenis, but eastern part is also equally covered by the Oni patches. You see the lower rainfall and high rainfall, both regions are actually having a significant proportion of open natural ecosystem. Now you can see why is that. In the drier region, it is understandable because this is dry, high temperature and low rainfall doesn't allow dense tree growth there. It's also more or less relatively better compared to the western, but still this area also support open natural ecosystem. So why is that so? There must be some driver apart from the climate that must be shaping these grasslands. Generally, fire and herbivory grazing is a very important big factor. Grazing shapes the grasslands across globe. The African savannas are largely, even in the higher rainfall regions, are largely shaped by those mega herbivore grazing. In the case of Rajasthan, the grazing pressure across the Rajasthan is extremely high because it's a very high livestock density. But today I won't speak about grazing, but I will talk about the second factor which actually determine these structures of the ecosystem.
Chetan, I don't want
Yeah.
to interrupt you, but can you also speak in Hindi?
Sorry, I yes, so yeah,
Yeah,
I'll
please.
try it now.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
yeah, so I'll just summarize पहले वाला कि हमने देखा है कि कैसे बारिश और तापमान है जो वो किसी भी जगह किस तरह का इकोसिस्टम होगा वो हमें बताएगा। लाइक कम बारिश और एक्सट्रीम टेम्परेचर हाई जो होता है, जो अक्सर उन हैबिटाट को जन्म देता है जहाँ पे पेड़ कम होते हैं, घास ज्यादा होती है, मोस्टली ग्रासलैंड्स और सवानास। बट कुछ एरिया ऐसे होते हैं जहाँ पे रेनफॉल ज्यादा भी होता है, उसके बावजूद भी वहाँ ग्रासलैंड्स और ओपन सिस्टम्स मेंटेन रह सकते हैं। और ऐसा क्यों है? उसका एक बड़ा रीजन ये है कि ग्रेजिंग, लाइव स्टॉक ग्रेजिंग और वाइल्ड हर्बिवोर ग्रेजिंग। ग्रेजिंग बड़ा एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट कारक है जो कुछ हैबिटाट्स का शेप एज ए ग्रासलैंड्स रखता है। बट ग्रेजिंग के अलावा एक और ऐसी चीज है जो इन सारे एरियाज को ओपन बनाए रखती है, ग्रासलैंड बनाए रखती है, और वो है फायर। बट बिफोर वी जम्प टू फायर, हम जब ग्रासलैंड सवानास के बारे में सोचते हैं, जैसे हमने पुरानी स्लाइड्स में, पिछली स्लाइड्स में देखा, सारे ओपन सिस्टम्स थे, ग्रास का डोमिनेटेड। बट क्या ग्रासलैंड सारे ओपन होते हैं, सवाना ओपन है? ऐसा केस नहीं है। जैसे आप इट्स अ वेरी क्लासिक स्टडी एंड यू कैन सी तीन फोटो, यू कैन सी थ्री फोटोज हियर फ्रॉम लेफ्ट टू राइट. All those three habitats are actually kind of can be categorized under the category of grasslands and savannas. And you see from the no tree to really high number of trees. So now अब एक क्वेश्चन जरूर होगा कि फिर हम कैसे पता करेंगे कि ये सवाना वुडलैंड है या ये फॉरेस्ट लैंडस्केप है, राइट? सो उसके लिए एक इम्पोर्टेंट टेबल है, आई टेल यू। फॉरेस्ट ट्रीज और सवाना ट्रीज में काफी फंडामेंटल डिफरेंसेस होते हैं, and some of those key differences are that first of all, in you see the third photo in this slide, it is covered with dense trees, but if you see the understory is also very rich in the herbaceous vegetation, which generally is not the case in the forest ecosystems. You will find in the mesic savannas. Why? Because those trees are of different characters. उन पेड़ों के कुछ ऐसे कैरेक्टर्स होते हैं जो डिफाइन करते हैं कि वो सवाना ट्रीज हैं या फॉरेस्ट ट्रीज हैं। कुछ सिंपल कैरेक्टर्स ये हैं कि हम जनरली देखते हैं कि जो हमारे ड्राईलैंड की ट्रीज हैं, दे हैव वेरी थिक बार्क लाइक खेजड़ी, राइट? सो थिक बार्क is one of the characters of the savanna trees. Thick bark help them resist fire because savanna habitat evolutionary fires के साथ evolve हुए, जबकि फॉरेस्ट हैबिटाट्स का एवोल्यूशन डिफरेंटली हुआ। देन फॉरेस्ट और जो सवाना ट्रीज की लीव्स एकदम अलग होगी, कंपाउंड लीव्स होंगे, जैसे आप खेजड़ी के पत्ते देखते हैं या अकेशिया के पत्ते देखते हैं। इट्स वेरी डिफरेंट फ्रॉम किसी ब्रॉड लीफ प्लांट्स जो हम फॉरेस्ट स्पीशीज में देखते हैं, बिकॉज दोज काइंड ऑफ लीव्स अलाउ लाइट पेनिट्रेशन ऑन द ग्राउंड, एंड लाइट पेनिट्रेशन ऑन ग्राउंड अलाउ द अंडर स्टोरी ग्रोथ। मतलब जब लाइट जमीन तक पहुंचेगी, पेड़ों की कैनोपी लाइट नहीं रोक सकती, इवन दो पेड़ों की डेंसिटी ज्यादा है। सो उस तरह के हैबिटेट म्यूजिक सवाना और सवाना वुडलैंड कैटेगरीज में आते हैं। सो यू सी ग्रासलैंड्स और सवाना बेसिकली नहीं, नो ट्री से लॉट ऑफ ट्री भी हो सकते हैं। एंड दैट इज द पार्ट, द ईस्टर्न पार्ट जो आपने पिछले मैप में देखा था, ये दिस वन ईस्टर्न पार्ट is actually more resemblance to woodland savanna, and that's why these most of these habitats can be categorized as these mesic savannas. And now see how fire shapes them. We often think fire as a very negative driver, कि हम हमें फायर आग के बारे में लगता है कि आग एक ऐसी चीज है जो इकोसिस्टम को खत्म करती है, which जो कुछ मामलों में सही भी है, बट सारे मामलों में एक जैसा फायर का इफेक्ट नहीं होता. एक ग्लोबल स्टडी आप ये अगर ग्राफ देखते हैं, शोज हाउ डिफरेंट फ्रीक्वेंसी एंड इंटेंसिटी ऑफ फायर कैसे अलग अलग हैबिटेट्स को शेप करती है. सो यू सी ट्रॉपिकल सवाना हियर. Tropical savannas actually are shaped by high frequency of fire but the low intensity. Intensity कम होगी और frequency ज़्यादा होगी fire की. Those kind of fire actually shape those savanna ecosystem, and in many cases they can have a positive effect, which अभी अभी हम आगे slide में बात करेंगे. So but when you in case of Indian grasslands and savannas, how fire affect them, we have a very limited understanding of that, because most of our understanding about fire impacts on grasslands comes from the grasslands of Africa and other parts of the world. But there are some limited studies, but there is some understanding. So you see, different intensity or different frequency of fire results into different kind of habitat structures. This map actually shows in last 24 years fire occurrence across the Rajasthan. This data जो है I extracted from Moody's FIRMS bands. So basically इनका this is 1 square kilometer resolution, and उस 1 किलोमीटर के अंदर कहीं भी अगर एक fire detect हुई है, so that entire pixel is counted as a fire. So the scale of fire might not be as much as it's showing, but you see those mostly those eastern part where you in the previous map where you were seeing जहाँ पे open natural ecosystem है eastern part में, you see there are also frequent fire happening in the same habitats. So there must be playing some role in keeping those habitats as grasslands. Now, we'll just zoom into one of the part where I visited, and I just try to understand what is the scale of fire in those area, which is around the Udaipur. So many of you might know around Udaipur there is a बहुत frequently fire होती रहती है. Many cases fire is actually put by people. Many cases might be natural. We don't know the actual it's natural or man-made, but fire do occur frequently. This map I extracted from Sentinel-2, which shows all the red patches you are seeing. These are the areas which were burnt in April 2024 within the 1 month period. The scale of fire you can see. And just to verify this, we actually, when we overlay with this FireM data, you'll see it's the right. So मैं आपको एक सिंपल चीज बताना होगा कि सेंटिनल का रेजोल्यूशन जो है वो बहुत छोटा है, कम अच्छा स्पार्स रेजोल्यूशन है, जबकि मोडीज डेटा का रेजोल्यूशन एक पिक्सल 1 स्क्वायर किलोमीटर का है. तो सेंटिनल डेटा से डायरेक्ट फायर डिटेक्शन लगाना मुश्किल है, बट एक मैट्रिक्स होती है इसमें, नॉर्मलाइज बर्न रेशियो, जो जले हुए लैंड पैचेस को आइडेंटिफाई कर सकती है यूजिंग इंफ्रारेड और शॉर्ट वेव इंफ्रारेड बैंड्स. बट वो लाइव फायर की इंफॉर्मेशन नहीं है, बट इट्स अ फायर स्कार इंफॉर्मेशन. तो टू ग्राउंड ट्रूथ करने के लिए तरीका, तो वी कैन नॉट गो बैक इन टाइम. सो वी ओवरले विद द एक्चुअल फायर डिटेक्शन मैप एंड वी सी ये जो सारे रेड पिक्सल ओवरलैप हो रहे हैं वो ऑलमोस्ट उन्हीं रेड पैचेस के आसपास हो रहे हैं. सो वी कैन सी दैट the scale of fire in just one small patch around Udaipur area is really high. And what this fire resulted then? These kind of grasslands. So you see the frequent or intermittent fire in these landscapes can shape these habitat into very productive grasslands, and these are actually very high livestock supporting regions as well. So grazing is an important driver there as well. So we can see how, but now since this data is actually collected based on remote sensing only, we also did a small experiment that fire is not just keeping grasslands, but in some cases fire can, yeah, so these are that habitat. I just put some photos. So these are most of these grasslands you are seeing here are managed by fire, many of those grasslands. So आप देख सकते हैं आग को हम as a tool भी use ले सकते हैं for management. And to see the efficiency of fire, not just to shape grasslands as grasslands, But how we can maintain the grasslands free of weeds or free of invasives? We did a small experiment in one of our restoration site, जहाँ पे हमने चार different plots लिए 10 by 10 10 by 20 meter size के, and we burned them in the March, which is the late winter season, which was a surface burn only because there was no canopy anyway. Then we monitor how the recovery of the vegetation happens. And if you see recovery of vegetation, this graph will show in all those four burnt plot, and we compare it with the just nearby unburned area, the control area, you'll see the grass, the middle box, you see the grass abundance does not change much, because a lot of the grasses which are there, native grasses like Dichanthium, Cenchrus, Sevan, Daman, ये जितने भी ग्रास है वो नेचुरली हिस्टोरिकली फायर के साथ इवॉल्व हुए इन लैंडस्केप में. So fire it doesn't harm those species. The dry part may burn, but the below ground biomass keep the grass tussocs alive. And the moment the fire goes off, within few days, actually, you can see some of those grasses started sprouting back again. But what grasses की abundance same है burned and unburned plot में, but what is difference here is legumes. You see, and there's a one sedge. So in our case, the legume was Tephrosia purpurea, which is a very common weed, which is spread across of these grasslands. So you see, in the 1 year, first year, this is the first year result only. Second year we'll measure, next year hope so. You see, there is significant control of growth of legume plants in those grasslands, while the fire supports the growth of some sedge species there, which are again have the fodder values. So you see, this is a photo of that plot. You see the area between lead line is actually only grass. The surrounding area here is actually covered by this Tephrosia weed. So if fire can be used, the weedy species. But what frequency of fire, how many times, कितने बार करना होगा, वो हमें depend पता चलेगा based on more data which we are collecting. This is at the very beginning stage. And this is how when the Tephrosia takes over the grasslands, this is how those grasslands look like. पूरा अब ये एक वीड स्पीशीज है लेग्यूम मेनेस फैमिली की, जो बहुत फास्ट फैलती है, वेरी कॉमनली फाउंड. इट्स नॉट नॉन नेटिव बट इट इज नेटिव बट इट इज स्टिल फंक्शन एज वीड इन मेनी patches. So fire may help regulate this expansion of weed. Then another thing, second चीज हम जो grasslands के बारे में पढ़ते हैं, ecological invasions. So invasion happens across the systems. सब हर तरह फॉरेस्ट में भी बहुत सारी इन्वेजिव स्पीशीज फैल जाती है, ग्रासलैंड में भी फैलती है, बट ग्रासलैंड्स का केस थोड़ा अलग है. बिकॉज अलग क्यों है? Because grasslands compared to forest ecosystems are more susceptible towards invasive species. मतलब grasslands ज़्यादा vulnerable हैं compared to forest ecosystems when it comes to ecological invasion. और उसका रीजन क्या है? इज दैट देयर इज सो कोई भी स्पीशीज किसी हैबिटेट में इन्वेशन होने के लिए उसको वहां के नेटिव कम्युनिटीज को आउट कम्पीट करना होगा. इट हैज टू आउट कम्पीट द नेटिव फ्लोरा, नेटिव फोना. But if the native fauna and flora of that habitat is not very complex and simple, the resistance toward any new species is very low. So those habitats are more likely to face invasion, and grasslands are some of those habitats. मतलब किसी भी आवास के अंदर कोई भी इन्वेजिव स्पीशीज सफल होगी या नहीं, कि इस बात पर निर्भर करता है कि उस हैबिटेट या उस आवास की जो स्थानीय प्रजातियां हैं उनकी डाइवर्सिटी कितनी है, उनमें फंक्शनल ग्रुप्स कितने हैं और उनकी कितनी संख्या है कि वो किसी भी नई आक्रामक प्रजाति को रजिस्ट कर सकती है आने से. उस चीज पे निर्भर करता है कि कोई भी इन्वेजिव स्पीशीज उस आवास में सफल होगी या नहीं. तो ग्रासलैंड्स और डेजर्ट के केस में वहाँ की स्थानीय कम्युनिटीज बहुत छोटी है, इसीलिए वहाँ पे कोई भी नई स्पीशीज आती है तो उसके पास कंपटीशन कम होता है. एंड compared to forest ecosystem, grasslands become more susceptible for invasion. And one such example of invasion is Sapis juliflora. We all know it was actually introduced. The main cause जिसके पीछे इसको इंट्रोड्यूस किया गया, idea that deserts needs to be greenified, deserts need to stop, deserts are expanding, and of course providing fuel to local people was also an objective. But the large scale plantations, such as at some point this was done, actually are the product of the idea that we think that grasslands and deserts are actually the wastelands. And now, when that idea translates into the action and the results of those action, we are seeing now that there are a lot of negative impacts now these species are causing on the native communities. And always this invasive species are not always introduced. Some invasive species can be native and we don't even realize that they are invasive. One such species is like dog, right? Dogs are also expanding very rapidly in these dryland ecosystems. And again, why it is more easy for dogs to occupy this grassland, because again they does not face any resistance from native community. There are no large predator enough to compete with them. So there's a lot of food subsidies are being provided. So dogs are also expanding across this ecosystem. One hypothesis is also that since the vulture decline happened in these areas, the abundance of carcasses, dead animals increases, and that's where the dog population took advantage of that increased resources, and the population increased. So now prosopis and dogs are actually the two big invasive species in the drylands or grasslands of Rajasthan. And now in ecosystem, there is one thing called top down and bottom up. उसका मतलब क्या होता है कि फूड पिरामिड के अंदर कोई भी स्पीशीज पे टॉप पे है और वो किसी भी तरह से नीचे की स्पीशीज को प्रभावित कर रही है, तो उस प्रभाव को हम टॉप डाउन प्रभाव इफेक्ट बोलते हैं. जबकि कोई स्पीशीज फूड पिरामिड के बिलो नीचे है और वहां से दूसरी स्पीशीज को प्रभावित कर रही है, दैट्स व्हाट वी कॉल द बॉटम अप इफेक्ट. सो केस ऑफ राजस्थान के ड्राईलैंड्स के अंदर यू विल सी एट द बोथ स्टेज, at the bottom up and top down, there are invasive species, dogs and prosopis. Invasive prosopis are changing open grasslands into woodlands. Dogs are actually playing the role of natural predator, which they are not. So native communities के साथ क्या होगा? Native wildlife communities in this case particularly, which is form of golden jackal, desert cat, jungle cat, Indian fox, desert fox. These are small size carnivore. So now what happens? जब दोनों तरफ से इन्वेजिव स्पीशीज होती है किसी भी सिस्टम में, सो देयर विल बी हाई कंपटीशन. और प्रकृति में लाइक वी ऑल नो कंपटीशन का सिंपल मतलब द लार्जर विल ऑलवेज हैव एन एडवांटेज ओवर द स्मॉलर स्पीशीज, एंड इफ कंपटीशन डजंट मिट गो एक्सटिंक्ट. तो इसीलिए किसी ना किसी स्केल पे दो स्पीशीज को अपना रिसोर्स पार्टीशन करना होता है. इट्स लाइक they cannot utilize the same resources at the same time at the same quantity. There has to be some sort of partition. So now in this case what's happening is that as the prosopis is expanding, because prosopis is turning grasslands into woodlands, the species which prefer woodlands are actually getting supported by prosopis, which is in this case jackal. So jackal occupancy is increasing across the area. But the species like Indian fox and desert fox does not like the dense woodland. They prefer open grassland habitat. So for them, there are pressure from two sides. One, their habitat is shrinking. Second, their competitor is also increasing. I'll translate in Hindi. So प्रकृति के अंदर जब कोई दो बड़ी प्रजाति में कंपटीशन होता है तो अक्सर छोटी प्रजाति को उसका नुकसान भुगतना पड़ता है. इस केस के अंदर कि जैसे प्रोसोपिस फैल रहा है, प्रोसोपिस खुले घास के मैदानों को डेंस वुडलैंड में कन्वर्ट कर रहा है, जिससे जो एक्चुअली जो वुडलैंड जैकल्स के लिए तो प्रेफरेबल है, बट लोमड़ी जैसे डेजर्ट फॉक्स एंड इंडियन फॉक्स जैसी प्रजाति जो खुले घास के मैदान प्रेफर करती है, उनके लिए वो फायदेमंद चीज नहीं है. सो फॉर द स्मॉलर फॉक्सेस, छोटी स्पीशीज के लिए दोहरी मार पड़ रही है प्रोसोपिस की. एक तो उनका प्रेफर आवाज जो है वो कम हो रहा है, साथ साथ उनका जो प्रतिद्वंदी प्रजाति है उसकी आबादी भी बढ़ रही है. So now at the spatial scale, there is high competition. And then now अब अगर हम एक्टिविटी देखें डॉग्स की, तो डॉग्स भी थ्रू आउट द डे एक्टिव रहते हैं एरिया में. सो यू सी ऑल थ्री नेटिव कार्निवोर्स avoid the activity time and dogs are active. So now what's happening? The activity period for the native species is shrinking. Spatially it's shrinking due to prosopis expansion. Temporally it is shrinking because of the dog. So there is a less time and less space to forage. And within that less space, there is even lesser space for the smaller foxes compared to jackal. That's why you see, because foxes does not only avoid the dogs, but they also avoid jackal. So there is a even lesser niche remain for foxes to remain active. So now there will become very high competition, and the result of this high competition, we see that in our study sample, especially in the western Rajasthan parts of Bikaner where I study, Indian fox has gone extinct in local areas where they used to be very frequently sighted. So that is the one reason of the increased competition due to dog in those habitats. एंड ये इफेक्ट सिर्फ और सिर्फ केवल कार्निवोर्स के साथ ही नहीं है, इवन इफ यू सी इंसेक्ट कम्युनिटीज नाउ कि how insects are responding towards these landscape changes, how grass is turning into woodlands, response get response from the invertebrates, you'll see Prosopis habitat have a significantly less abundance of insects. And if you see the second graph below, you'll see that functional group which are remaining at higher in the Prosopis are very much different than acacia. It means Prosopis में पाए जाने वाले insect very बिल्कुल अलग प्रजातियों के हैं compared to native woodlands के अंदर पाए जाने वाले insects. For example, crickets like species, Prosopis is supporting the expansion of crickets in some area, while in the native woodlands you won't see high abundance of crickets, but you will see other herbivore and omnivore insects and more. So the effect of this invasion is not just remain restricted to one trophic group like carnivores or even in case of rodents, the same case happens. The open habitat species rodent are getting down while the invasive bandicoot rates are increasing. So this effect can be seen on the all trophic level from the insects to mammals. So that's how the invasion actually affect those landscape. Now, what is the third part I'll be discussing about the grasslands which are facing is grasslands can actually function when we talk about climate mitigations. We do a large scale plantation, and one of the reason is also for the plantation that it captures a lot of carbon. So one thing we support plantation for is that because we do large scale plantation to increase our carbon capture. But grasslands in their own form can actually form a large amount of carbon even without having a lot of trees. This one IPCC report graph, if you see, this tell most of the grasslands supports their carbon below ground, and that amount can be massive, more than 100 ton carbon per hectare in many cases. While you see the tropical forest is this one, while all these temperate grasslands, deserts, and silent tropical savannas, tundra, there the below ground carbon amount is much higher compared to the above ground biomass carbon, right? But also keep in mind these habitats, these grasslands habitats are in the area where you receive a very limited rainfall, and in that rainfall this kind of forest, tropical forest, cannot be supported. Even doesn't matter how many trees we want to plant. So we may not get achieve the result by planting more trees in this dry area, which we might achieve in the tropical regions, which are the forest or tropical forest areas. So one example, see, this is some of the example how grassland not just store the below ground biomass, they also store a lot of above ground biomass as well. So this is one Lycanthum annullatum species in one of our restoration site, and you see they can create enormous biomass, and the productivity can range up to 3 ton per hectare in the grassland. And this is the above ground biomass. And when you talk about, and this is again the size, you see it's from the old paper, the height and width of grasslands can grow up to this scale. This is a Lycanthum species which can grow such large, and it is a palatable species as well. This is again the Tripidum bengalensis, the munj. You see the large tusks they make. So in terms of biomass, grasses can achieve really significant above ground biomass. Above ground. But another picture actually stands in the below ground biomass. This one study we did in somewhere in Maharashtra, which shows basically when we restore grasses without large scale tree plantation, if we just restore the grassy layer back, you can have a significant increase in carbon. You can see from the green, which is the most degraded area, and the yellow bar, the second and third year of restoration, by just putting grassy layer back. Within 3 years, you can see there is a 20 to 30% increase in the carbon. And that the maximum capacity of those grasslands in ideal condition can reach up to 30 ton carbon per hectare. So grasslands, the amount of carbon they sequester below ground and amount of biomass they have above ground also can be a very enormous. This another example is actually Bunny, which is very exceptional grasslands where you can see 100 ton, more than 100 ton carbon per hectare. And this graph below, you'll see that the yellow bar you see is actually the restored grass patches, which supports the highest amount of carbon. And this amount can range up to 140 ton carbon per hectare. Right. So now we see when we what happens. But yeah, so before there's one more thing. Like so, when we do grasslands restoration, there's a very common practice a lot of people use basically. Even when we are storing for the restoring for the grass land only, not plantation, we normally plow or till the land, and that tilling actually causes the loss of carbon. And the scale of that loss is very high, which you can see this graph. If you see the this is comparison between two plots, which one is the supposedly degraded areas and second one is the restored area, basically in the brown color treatment, where tilling was done to restore the grasslands. And after 10 years, and you'll see the second graph, the area which was tilled, the soil organic carbon amount is less in that area after 10 years compared to the area which was supposed to be degraded but untouched. The soil was not disturbed. You see, so within the 10 years of gap, the soil cannot recover the baseline carbon if tilling happen in the area. So that's a scale of negative, a scale of impact tilling has on the soil. So yeah, so now what we started discussing how grasslands are actually the open landscape divided by trees, but they're rich in grass species diversity. Fire and herbivore is a good thing. Fire can shape grasslands for the better if used as a management tools. Then invasion actually not only affect single species, but the effect of invasion happens at the multiple trophic level that can change the composition of native species completely. And then when we talk about plantation and achieving carbon credit goals by large scale plantation, you can see grasslands can store enormous amount of carbon without even plantation, but by restoring grasslands back to their climax stage. So now essentially we are talking here that the goal for the grassland is not to green them, not to greenify them or desert, but to restore them. And what that essentially mean is, first we recognize grasslands for grasslands, right? Grasslands are very ancient ecosystems. They are climatically resilient ecosystems. Their structure and diversity are shaped by fire and grazing and soil. So fire and grazing increase the health of grasslands. And the most fundamental things we need to do that we need to decategorize them as a wasteland. They're not wasteland. They are a very highly productive landscape with unique structures. A lot of grass species which you see are not actually found anywhere else in other habitats. And again, grassland stores enormous biomass underground and below ground. And it can actually help mitigate our carbon goals by capturing a lot more carbon below ground with a much less cost of water, because most of these grasslands are in the low rainfall regions, doesn't require a lot of water. So yeah, I would like to stop with this now. Thank you. If you have any questions.
Thank you, Chetan. Um, yeah, if you have questions or comments for Chetan, then you can share now. Um, I will just try if I can unmute everyone so that they can be an open flow. I'm just trying to figure it out. Till then, you can raise your hands and I can unmute you, um, or I can read your questions from the comment box or question and answer box. Just trying to.
I think chat is disabled, some of them are saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure that out. Chetan, can you answer, respond to Aditya's question? Um, are the old
Yes,
growth
yes, I'll just
savannas in Rajasthan
okay.
along with? Yeah, please go ahead. Yes.
Okay, so and so we have the most of our grasslands which we have in the eastern Rajasthan, eastern parts are actually created by anthropogenic activities. But it's a very confusing thing, like which we call a natural or the anthropogenic, because this anthropogenic factor has been there for very, very long time also. So yes, there are both kind of grasslands in Rajasthan. You can say especially old growth savannas, which we have in the West Rajasthan technically, which doesn't. But grazing is again everywhere. So it's very hard to say non-anthropogenic old growth savanna. It's hard to say we have. Most of grasslands have been influenced by anthropogenic activities. So it's hard to say, because even if it is wild grazing, it's grazing ultimately which shapes the grasslands. So it's hard to differentiate that non old growth and anthropogenic are separate. They are more or less same basically. If that's answer your question, Aditya.
Okay, Chetan, there is another
Yeah.
question. How does one distinguish and understand man-made fires from natural fires?
Again, it's I don't have a correct answer for this. It's very hard to tell. When fire occurs, it's very hard to tell if it is a man-made or natural. In many cases, say if you go, a lot of people has actually do burn these areas because they have a large number of livestock. They do it in the northern Western Ghat also, in other parts of India as well, not just in Rajasthan. And this fire being used by people for a very long time. It's just a colonial time when we criminalize the fire practices. Otherwise, historically, communities are actually burning these patches to increase their productivity, keeping them out of weeds and uh, woody, keeping woody vegetation away also. So that because ultimately what they desire communities depends on them. A common practice across in India where people burn the grasslands. Natural fire must be occurring definitely, but yeah, distinguishing which is natural and man-made is, I think, art. It required detective let's go to the area and see if someone is actually put the fire or not. So even the western Rajasthan, in many patches, if you go around, people actually annually burn their commons also in many patches. But in many parts, actually, again, it's an idea must have come at some point in time. We have started thinking that fire is very bad, very bad. We tried to stop fire everywhere in grassland areas, which is actually very, I mean, cannot be judged of that because there's a lot of impact of fire also. But point is, fire can be used and has been used as a management tool for the grasslands for a very long time. I can read Parul next question.
Yes, I just wanted to check if I have unmuted everyone and Anil
Okay.
has raised his hand. Anil, can you unmute yourself and ask your question or comment so that we
यस
can also check? Yes, please.
थैंक यू आपका बहुत अच्छा प्रेजेंटेशन था एक प्रश्न है मैं पिछले राजस्थान में कई सालों से हूँ सो जिस हिसाब से जो चाहे किसी भी एजेंसी की बात करें गवर्नमेंट हो या एनजीओ हो या कोई भी सीएसओ हो पंचायत हो जिस तरह से ग्रासलैंड रिस्टोरेशन के नाम पर जो प्लांटिंग हो रही है फ्रूटिंग ट्रीज लग रहे हैं हम सब लोग उसके लिए क्वेश्चन करते हैं बट क्या हमारे पास सॉल्यूशन है कि ग्रासलैंड को रिस्टोर कैसे करें क्योंकि जिस हिसाब से जो ग्रासलैंड रिस्टोर करना है तो जितना सीड चाहिए और जो हम जो जो रिस्पॉन्सिबल एजेंसी है चाहे वो गवर्नमेंट की कोई भी एजेंसी हो फॉरेन रिसर्च इंस्टीट्यूट झांसी हो या एक्स वाई जेड जो भी हो उनके पास जब घास का बीज मांगते हैं तो उनके पास नहीं होता, तो क्या सॉल्यूशन है?
ये आपका प्रश्न है तो बहुत काफी इंपॉर्टेंट क्वेश्चन है मैनेजमेंट दृष्टि से। और इसका सोल्यूशन एक्चुअली मेरे ख्याल से जो लोग डायरेक्टली रेस्टोरेशन प्रैक्टिस कर रहे हैं उनके पास होगा। उन कई जगह हम लोग सीट शेयर भी करते हैं, सीट की शॉर्टेज भी है, दैट इज ऑल्सो अ फैक्ट। बट आई थिंक इसका सोल्यूशन तो प्रॉब्ली आई एम नॉट द बेस्ट पर्सन टू आंसर, बट मुझे जैसा समझ में आता है कि सीड शॉर्टेज से तो हम आपस में हमारे एनुअल कलेक्शन करें अपने अपने एरिया में कम्युनिटीज के साथ। अगर ये एक रेगुलर प्रैक्टिस बने हर गांव या हर गौचर के कम्युनिटी जो लोग उससे डिपेंडेंट हैं, कि हर साल कुछ जैसे शायद कभी हुआ भी करती थी, होगी प्रॉब्ली, तो सीड की समस्या से छुटकारा तो शायद ही या तो उस तरीके से पा सकते हैं, या फिर हम प्रॉब्ली साइंटिफिक टेक्निक से कोई लैब बड़ी हाई प्रोडक्टिव सीड बनाए। बट अगेन, अगर हमारा उद्देश्य नेचुरल ग्रासन रीजनरेट करना है तो उस तरह के सीड्स का कुछ ना कुछ इम्पैक्ट हो सकता है प्रॉब्ली इन लॉन्ग टर्म। तो इसका सही आंसर तो शायद मेरे पास नहीं है। आई थिंक जो प्रैक्टिस लंबे समय से कर रहे हैं ग्राउंड पे लोग, वो ज्यादा बेटर आंसर कर पाएंगे इसको। बट रिगार्डिंग ये पेड़ अपने पेड़ पौधे जो फल फ्रूटिंग ट्रीज प्लांट्स करते हैं, सो मुझे जो समझ में आई एक बात पिछले कुछ सालों में, दैट कि एक्चुअली ऑनेस्टली देखा जाए तो कॉमन्स पे लोगों की डिपेंडेंसी बहुत ज़्यादा कम हो गई है। तो एक्चुअली लोग केवल एक भावनात्मक रूप से कॉमन से जुड़े हुए हैं कि गौचर और उनको बचाना है, बट बहुत जगह उनकी डिपेंडेंसी इतनी कम हो गई है कि वो चीज़ें सारी बातों में रह जाती है, पर जब एक्शन की बात आती है तो बहुत जगह मुश्किल होता है लोगों को कलेक्टिवली इंगेज करवाना। इट्स लाइक सो ये एक चैलेंज है डेफिनेटली। और उसका बड़ा रीजन है कि लाइवलीहुड ऑप्शंस इतने बदल गए हैं लोगों के, तो कॉमन से उतना गेन अब शायद नहीं हो रहा लोगों को काफी जगह, जितना शायद पहले हुआ करता था।
ओके,
ये
थैंक
एक
यू
चिंता
सर।
की दृष्टि है डेफिनेटली।
थैंक्स अनिल, हमने टेस्ट भी कर लिया कि हमारा अब अनम्यूटेड हो गए हैं सब। बट गोइंग टू द नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन, एंड वही दही कह रही हैं कि अ वेरी गुड इंफॉर्मेटिव सेशन, थैंक यू फॉर द इंसाइट्स। आई हैव अ वेरी बेसिक क्वेश्चन, इज एन ओपन ग्रासलैंड इन टर्म्स ऑफ कैनोपी कवर?
सॉरी, इन ओपन ग्रास इन टर्म्स ऑफ कैनोपी कवर, आई डिडंट अंडरस्टैंड।
वैदे, अगर आप अनम्यूट करके अपना प्रश्न डायरेक्टली चेतन से बात कर सकते हैं तो अच्छा है थोड़ा। इफ यू आर स्टिल देयर, आई थिंक आई कैन सी यू हियर, if you would like to unmute and explain your question.
Hi,
Yeah.
hi, I'm Vaidehi.
हेलो।
I just wanted to understand the meaning of an open grassland. Is it in terms of canopy cover or any other meaning of an open grassland? What is exactly an open grassland?
So actually, the term we use normally is the open natural ecosystem here, जो basically ये बताता है कि these ecosystem are not actually determined by the canopy cover, but the canopies are basically open, and that openness can range from no trees to a lot of trees। जैसा मैंने ग्राफ में बताया था कि कैनोपी एक ऐसा भी हो सकता है कि बिल्कुल पेड़ नहीं हो, सीधे ओपन ग्रासलैंड्स हो, वो भी ग्रासलैंड्स हैं। एंड कुछ ऐसे एरियाज हैं जहाँ पे काफी पेड़ भी होंगे, बट स्टिल उन लोग उस एरियाज को हम म्यूजिक सवाना बोलते हैं। और उसका रीजन है क्योंकि वहाँ पाए जाने वाले पेड़ों का कुछ कैरेक्टरिस्टिक ऐसे होते हैं जो उनको ग्रासलैंड क्लाइमेट के लिए ज्यादा सुटेबल बनाते हैं कंपेयर टू द फॉरेस्ट ट्रीज। सो यहाँ ओपन का मीन यस कैनोपी से ही है, और दैट ओपननेस कैन रेंज फ्रॉम वेरी लेस ओपन टू वेरी लार्ज ओपन।
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Chetan, next question is by Aparna. She's saying, thank you for the presentation, quite insightful, especially in the relational ways in which invasion flora fauna can change the entire ecosystem. So sorry, it was not a question, it was just it was a comment. Thank you, Aparna. I think next is by Venkatesh. If we plant trees with more distance in between them, is it still a problem? If we
So see,
plant trees.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the idea here, so again, the point here is not the plantation. Point here is restorations. You can plant trees in grasslands because there are a lot of grassland trees, savanna trees there. But it's why not think about planting shrubs and bushes and the grasses? because ultimately ecosystem is made of different layers of vegetation. It's not just the canopy, one layer, but the grassy layer. Then there are small bushes like Sweda in the saline areas, Crotalaria, and Arva. These are the small bushes species. So one second. So why we all when we talk about plantation, why we always talking about trees? How many trees at what density? Why not planting grasses and bushes and the shrubs? So even you're planting trees as sparse, and the grassy layers and the bushy layer is still lacking in the diversity, which doesn't support the native fauna and other species. That still won't be an effective way of restoration probably. So the point is, do not think about plantation, think about restorations or management of habitat. And when we think about restoration management, this question won't occur. It will come, okay, we have to manage them. Okay, what species are there? What kind of species layer, functional layers in those habitats are? So in each layer, we have to contribute actually.
Okay, I'm going to take a next question from Aparna, and then we can. I see Arun has raised his hand, and Fazal and Karni, so we can just take Aparna's question first. What are impacts of fire and grazing on fauna of grasslands?
So I don't have the exact answer for it right now, because our fire experiment is just 1 year old and it's a very small scale. So we did not see the other communities in the. So in the small 10-meter plot, we can only fauna we can see is probably insects, which is probably will look at it now. But our previous idea was only to actually see if fire actually control the VD species expansion, because that was one of the problem we are facing in our site. But in some other studies, the effect of fire on fauna is very differential. For it has a different impact on the ants and termites. So for one, it can be a positive, but other further it can be negative. But in our case, what's the case, we actually don't know. So the response, it can be differential impact of fire on other vertebrates. Fauna. I hope that was my answer.
Aparna, if you can also unmute yourself and.
No, thanks. I just got my answer. Thank you, Chetan.
Okay. Okay. Arun, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Okay, thank you. It was very good presentation, Chetan. Very insightful presentation was there. So I'm basically based in Ahmedabad, Gujarat, and worked a lot on Kutch side, basically.
Sorry,
So I had one observation, basically. That's you talk about the Bunny grassland, but then there is other grassland, is a Nalia side of the grassland, where these great Indian bustards and other species are there. So that's also very rich, very extensive grasslands are there. So my observation is that in that grassland, the species is mainly a perennial species, that is Symbopogon martini. Okay, and this species is not what you call a palatable grass. So livestock normally don't prefer that species unless until there is a very intense drought and 2-3 years of continuous droughts are there. People, livestock don't prefer that thing. In those areas, because it's my observation is that because of it is a perennial species and has a very strong rhizome system there, and because there is no grazing in that area, there is hardly any Prosopis invasion in that area. So you go to Kutch Bunny side, you have a entire Bunny is almost covered by the Prosopis juliflora. But in Nalia grassland, which is again a very good grassland, but because there is no grazing, because the palatability is not there, and this species composition is very perennial grass with a very strong root system. So this thing is not happening. This invasion is not happening there in that area. So can we use this particularly? And then these grasslands are used by the species like bustards and floricans for their breeding and other purpose. So can we think about this kind of a thing? Are we going to go only for a palatable species kind of a thing? The moment we go for the palatable species, the invasion chances are very high. That's my observation. That is what's happening in the Bunny side. So what is your observation in that things?
No, I think you're absolutely right. The goal is not to go with the palatable species always, because I saw those Moon's grasslands. Moon is not a palatable species technically. It does the same thing. It occupies the niche, so maybe other species cannot come, like weeds and other, and it provides shelter for wildlife. So in the restoration perspective, I mean, I agree with you. It's not always thinking about putting palatable grasses there. It's more about the functional diversity of the system, and to maintain that functional diversity, the different functional guilds of grasses or plant species need to be bring back if they are not there. That's a very, I think, good point.
That
We
is
need
what
to
I
think.
found, because a lot of NGOs now in the light of this fodder requirement and other things, particularly in Kutch, they go for this palatable species, and that is why I
Yes,
have a very very serious observation in this thing.
true, true. I agree. And I think one issue is that because the demand of fodder is also very demanding. Animal, there is a severe fodder scarcity in many part also. So those two interests are conflicting when it comes to choose palatable or non-palatable grasses. But I agree, if the goal is wildlife biodiversity, especially in the PAs, it's not required we plant provide shelters or some other functional activities provide provision to wildlife.
Can we take another question? Chetan?
Yeah. Yes.
So Nishant, would you like to unmute yourself and ask her your question, or you want me to? Is Nishant here? Okay, I will just read it out. Chetan is saying that wonderful presentation and work. Just wanted to check if you worked on developing SOP for using fire for ecological restoration, because largely anthropogenic fires are uncontrolled.
Yes, actually, no, not yet. Our fire understanding is very at the very beginning stage yet. So not yet, but maybe at some point if we think we can think of it.
Okay. Um, Puzzle, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure, Parul, thanks.
Yeah.
Chetan, thanks for your presentation. I had a question. I've been doing some restoration work in open ecosystems in central India, and one of our major challenges is building a reference model. So, what are we exactly restoring towards? So, is there anywhere in India, or ideally in central India, where someone has put together a kind of list of of what number of different plant have different plant types should exist in a healthy open natural ecosystem, or in some sense in what an old growth open natural ecosystem would look like in that area, so you can restore towards that.
I think this is the question we all are facing when we start restoration, finding an ideal reference site. And for grasslands, I feel it's very hard to first, since most grasslands are actually heavily affected by human activities everywhere. It's hard to say which is the ideal reference stage of the grasslands. Some grasslands are actually protected for the fodder, some are just left degraded, and some protected area are actually maintained for the biodiversity purpose. So it's hard to find the right reference ecosystem. But what I or we are doing is that actually we are following this old flora, like this for our case we are reading this Bandari's flora, which has a pretty good information. So whatever we can understand from existing literature, I think that's the only thing which is helping us now. For central India, I have very limited understanding actually, so I'm not sure if I can answer that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I see Virag is here. Virag, will you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Chetan. It was indeed enlightening talk for us. My question is, when you showed that jackals and desert fox and Indian fox, So I just want you to elaborate slightly on that. That does this densening of mm, grasslands, like invasion of prosopis or other, canopy flora, does it suits desert fox more, and is unsuitable for Indian jackal, or is it what is that I understand? Can you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, so the jungle cat and jackal, those two are generous species. जो आप you can see across the India they found many
Ye-
cases dense woodlands. In many
Yes.
cases they might survive in the open grassland. They are very generous in nature.
Yeah.
So expanding woodland is not a negative thing for them.
Mm.
But species जैसे अपना Indian fox, desert cat, Indian fox, ये हैं, these are the open habitat specialists. So इनके
Okay.
लिए when these grasslands are turning into woodland, their preferred habitat is shrinking. So there's less and less habitat for them. But for the species like jackals, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. They are
So
generalists.
for yeah,
Maybe. Yeah. Yeah.
जी.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Ankila is not here. Okay, maybe we can take her question later. Nikhil, I can still see you here if you would like to unmute yourself and ask question. Otherwise, I can. Or is he there?
Hi.
Yeah.
Yeah, just wanted to understand about the fire management, the experiment that you have conducted now. What is your understanding in terms of what is the intensity at which we should uh, have fires in these patches and all?
So what should we have? We are not there yet, but as the based on remote sense data which we see is that in last 20 years those grasses actually have faced more than 10 and 12 fire incidents. Means every alternative year there has been some level of fire there, and that fire is resulting into those kind of landscape there. In our experience, it's just one second year now, second year monitoring. So from our experience, we cannot say like how many should time we need to burn it in fixed interval. But based on remote sensing data, is every alternative year, and in some cases there are once in 3 years. So there has to be a some threshold number of frequency which can be ideal probably, but it will vary with area to area. So there cannot be one standardized number for all the areas. And because for instance, our understanding of fire is very limited. Even in the literature, there is very less information available about fire being used as a management, or even the impact of fire on the tropical grasslands of India. So it's a very data lacking area.
How did the traditional communities manage the fire in this landscape?
So I haven't actually seen them actually doing that. How do they do it? But I spoke few people how to actually burn it. That they just put a fire and they let the large area burn, and they have their boundary marketed in many places. Like especially in the area, that was the example I was giving. There's a large compartment, stone walls happen. I don't know is there a private land or the community land what, but the few people I interacted with, they say they actually they burn the entire patch where they have that stone wall. So it's very depends very to vary. So that will prevent fire going away, well, going further in the landscape. That's how they control.
Thank you, Chetan. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Uh, Karni, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
First of all, thank you, Parul, for such a organized, such beautiful talk.
Thank you. Can we hear Karni? Is he audible? Sorry, I'm just checking with Chetan. Is he audible?
No, not to be honest.
Okay. Um, Okay, we can go to the next question, then maybe we can take Karni's question later. Kobita, can you?
जैसे जैसे
Oh,
इम्प्रूव
okay.
हो रही है या जैसे जैसे रीग्रोथ कर रही है इन एरियाज के अंदर ग्रासलैंड
वेट
में।
वेट, कैन यू रिपीट अगेन? आवाज रुक गई थी बीच में।
हाँ चेतन, मैं ये पूछ रहा हूँ कि जैसे आपने इनविजिव स्पीसीज के ऊपर काफी काम किया है, तो ग्रासलैंड जो हमारे हैं उनमें जैसे जैसे इनविजिव स्पीसीज का अपीयरेंस बढ़ रहा है, तो बर्ड्स के ऊपर भी आपने ऐसा कुछ देखा है कि बर्ड्स की कोई स्पीसीज है वो वहां से वॉश आउट हो रही है या नई स्पीसीज का इंट्रोड्यूस हो रहा है, ऐसा कुछ आपने रिकॉर्ड किया अभी तक?
मतलब हमने हमारे स्टडी में नहीं किया, बट देयर मस्ट, बर्ड के सीन में इम्पैक्ट देखने के लिए वी नीड टू स्टडी एट द लार्जर लैंडस्केप लेवल बिकॉज दे ट्रेवल्स अ लॉट. So we don't, well, you might be having an impact on birds. Definitely there are studies on them, their nesting is being affected in many cases, but हमारे केस के अंदर we did not study that, so it's hard to say.
ओके, थैंक यू सर, थैंक्स सर।
Kobita, would you like to go next?
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Uh, Chetan, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. It cleared so many things in my mind. So I'm in Hyderabad, and my question was, I think, partially answered earlier, but that's exactly what I wanted to know. How do you maintain a restored patch of grassland if the traditional, or old practices of burning or grazing have sort of not been recorded, or how do we go about it? You did mention that I think alternate year burnings have been seen. I mean, fires have been set and things like that. Because in our region, what we are seeing is the forest department people are now setting fires every year, and it's a little worrisome because I'm thinking that certain species of grasses don't do so well with such frequent burning, and certain species, of course, thrive. Like, the Sankaris sort of increases rapidly, and, certain other species, we don't see, in fact, it's declining, like polytoca and things like that. So I'm not sure how you can go about the management in a restored grassland.
I think it's important to know that so the effect of fire is it's not a uniform on all the species, as you mentioned. Some species
Mm-hmm.
increases, some even native species doesn't like fire. So
Mm-hmm.
the use of fire probably mostly depends on how we want to see the landscape. Basically, it
Right.
depends on the stakeholder only.
Mm-hmm.
And the exact frequency, as I mentioned, like it's hard to say because there's not very less information available. What remotely sense data tell is that how frequently it is occurring. We don't know if it is natural or man-made all the time, right? So we know this much occurrence is resulting this, but if we change this frequency, what would be the results? That we don't know.
Right,
So
right,
it
right.
depends. Only study and more research can answer this question. But again, even those results cannot be replicable in different landscape. It can vary.
Yeah, okay. So
Yes.
that's a
Fire is a
problem
very
in
tricky. Yes.
mm, and grazing is also increasing rather than, so sometimes the worry is that, before the plants or the forbs actually can even set seed, they're being grazed, including some certain grasses. So I don't know how this works. Do you think, the setting seed is a necessary thing, or, root stock can sort of survive and.
No, so rootstock can survive for a lot of species, but for some
Mm,
species we may have to provide seeds. But in many,
okay.
say in many cases, actually, if
Mm,
we see when we stop grazing in certain area, so
mm-hmm.
grazing can also be used as a management tool. But again,
Right.
the constant grazing is again having a negative impact.
Mm,
But
mm.
different frequency of grazing can also have results in different compositions of vegetation in many areas.
Okay. Okay.
If you are grazing immediately in monsoon,
Mm,
a
mm.
very different sort of plants will be coming after that grazing spell. But you stop the grazing in the monsoons and start grazing in late after post monsoon
Mm,
time.
mm.
Then after that, in that grazing, the new community will be much different than the previous one.
Right,
So
right.
and it is also affected by season then, because by then season also changes.
So is it
So
pretty
actually,
complicated
it's
to
yes, true,
manage a
it's true.
restored grassland also, no?
So management, when we talk about management, I think it's hard to manage the species composition, but
But
the larger goal of management can be like we can control the invasive species and we can
okay,
control some of the degrading drivers,
okay,
and keep monitoring, because
okay.
we don't have long-term data of any grasslands in India.
Mm,
We don't know how
mm-hmm.
they respond to every change or every disturbance.
That's right. Thank you so much.
So
That was really very insightful. Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so Radhika, if you're still here, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, Chetan. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was quite lovely. What I really remembered is your bit on the fox, on the desert fox, and how its habitat is sort of shrinking. And I recently traveled to Jaisalmer, where I saw a lot of sand dunes, and I also heard a lot of the sand dunes are disappearing. Wondering if you could perhaps help me understand what happens to the dune species specifically, because I'm assuming that the greening or the invasives have a very acute impact on them.
So there are actually dune specialist species which actually prefer the only loose sand, and most of them are actually reptile, like all-headed snake, and there's a sandfish which you can see in those area, which is very rare now, and there are some other reptiles as well, which actually particularly thrive. This toad-headed some species of agamas are actually adapted to those sand dunes. So I think even hard grounds they don't prefer, let alone the uh, woody encroachment. So disappearing sand dune definitely will be having some impact on them. But again, the same thing. Like I hope someone is studying about them. We don't know what exactly the what's the scale of that impact. But yeah, there are some sand dune specialist species, like I mentioned, which actually thrive on only on sand dunes and cannot survive in the other kind of terrain and vegetation probably.
Thanks, Chetan.
Does that answer your question? I hope I understood your
Yeah,
question right.
it really does. I was also wondering how much percentage of the dunes have disappeared, but perhaps I can write to you a little later and see.
Yeah, please. And that is the one question I was also I'm thinking of measuring somehow if I have time, because in most areas sand dunes has gone like completely gone, completely gone. You don't see large sand dunes, except you have to go to far end of the western Bikaner or western Jaisalmer or western Barmer only to see those kind of dunes. Otherwise, the most area either they are disappeared or they are stabilized by agriculture or some vegetation plantation.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to understand. Perhaps I can write and see if you
Yes,
can
please,
follow up.
definitely.
Okay, Virat, I see. Yeah, would you like to unmute yourself? You did? Okay, I'm okay, sorry. Yeah, so Arun has a question. He's asking, does fire have any long-term effect on nutritional values of grass species?
Yes, studies have shown that actually fire and grazing both actually affect nutrient values of grasses for positive in many cases. So intermittent fire might be good for nutrient values of grasses as well.
And he's also asking if you can share the links of few papers you mentioned in your talk.
Yes, sure. You can write to me on email. I'll share the paper with you.
Yeah. So I know Nidhi and Ankila are not here, but I would like to just ask those questions because the session has been recorded and for the benefit of the people who have stayed back. Is that okay, Chetan? Can you take two more
Yeah,
questions?
sure.
Yeah. Okay. So Ankila has asked that although grasses are the most abundant plants in grasslands, most of the biodiversity in grasslands is contributed by non-grassy herbs or forbs. I was curious how plant diversity responded to your fire experiments if you measured this.
So we in our data, yes, we measured all the non-grassy and grassy species both, and I presented in the form of functional group only to make it simple. But we have a species-wise data also, so I can discuss with Angela. I can show. So there are some species-specific response also. But again, because it's just 1 year data I have, so it's too we cannot say too much about it. But yeah, we are actually monitoring all grassy and non-grassy species in our plot.
Thanks, Chetan. I think this would be the last question. Though we have another one more, but Nidhi, this question is from Nidhi. She said she's saying that, "Hi Chetan, thanks for this work. I wanted to inquire whether there is any mapping of types of grasslands, especially in Rajasthan. You showed us the type of grassland. Is there any mapping of the same, and then some mapping of vulnerability of these grasslands?"
I did not come across any mapping, but actually some causally reports are there which actually broadly categorize these different patches. I can look for those report and share if you would like, but I'm not sure about the proper sensing mapping has happened or not.
Okay, I have one last question, and I don't know if I
Yeah,
have
please, sure.
asked. What are some of the mechanisms of restoring the native grassland species to their original populations?
Mechanism in particular, basically the idea. So what the way we understand the grassland is that we minimize the disturbance factor first, and we start monitoring the changes ideally before we plan any interventions. Given that, because we don't have any long-term understanding of our grasslands, because many weed infestation which we see of native species, it might be of a result of a seasonal change or seasonal cycle. They may have come naturally in less than 5 years, 6 years, 3 years, because that has we have I have observed it in a lot of areas. So uh, targeting active intervention too much, I don't think is ideal. Best we can do, we can minimize the disturbance factors, and based on our observation, we can assist some of the like we can put some, if we see some species are desired or required not there, we can put some, we can support through the seed bank. But ultimately idea is to observe the how the nature takes the course, and it's a trial and error kind of thing. You learn, you do something.
Thank you, Chetan. इतने सारे questions के जवाब देने के लिए, and thank you everyone for staying back. We still have 8 minutes, so if you want to unmute yourself and ask and have general comments for Chetan, you're most welcome. And before we end this webinar, I just wanted to share that we are going to have another webinar on introduction to the restoration of policy landscape in Rajasthan, which is our speakers are Sanjana Nair, she's a policy analyst, lead Rajasthan in A3, and Aditya, he's a senior policy analyst, ERA India. So this is on 16th Feb, which is Friday, I think, and the same timings, 4 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. We'll be sharing the registration link sooner, and hope that we see you all, and hope that you can join us for that webinar as well. So yeah, we have another 7 minutes. Please, if anyone wants to unmute, have general comments for Chetan or the webinar itself, any feedback, would love to hear that. Yeah, about the recording, we have started. Yeah, recording. We'll share the recording. It's just that I started the recording 10 minutes to the presentation. I suddenly remember that I have to also record, so I apologize for that. But yes, so whatever recording we have right now, yes, we will definitely share. Yeah, we'll share the recording. Sharing the slides, Chetan, would
Yeah,
you? Yeah, okay.
yeah,
So,
I can share. I
so
can
we can
share with
share the
you.
slides, recording, and the papers that maybe if Is there any paper supporting and that can be used as a resource? So we will be sharing that as well. Yeah, Chetan, Vijay.
Okay, everybody, thank you so much
Thank you
for
so much.
listening.
So we can end. Thank you so much. Is there any other question? Comment? No. Yeah. Okay. Very good evening then.
See you guys.
Thank you, Ananya. Hope to see you in the next webinar as well.